Here we are again talking about disciples. I could talk for months about it, but anyway, here as we're talking about this thing about being a disciple, the Bible says Jesus went up into a mountain and he was praying and he called unto him some disciples. The Bible says they went unto him. Have you ever felt something call in your heart and said, I want to be a disciple? I don't want to be a nominal believer. I don't want to be this cold-hearted, lukewarm believer. I want to go all the way with Jesus. Now, whether or not I go all the way, I don't know, but I know this, I want to be, and I'd rather be a wannabe than not want to be. And so I'm telling you, I want to be a disciple. You want to be a disciple because in being a disciple, understand this, there are demands of that disciple. There are demands of a disciple. Let's talk about the demands of a disciple. The Bible says in Mark 8:34 through 37, it says, and when he called the people unto him with his disciples also, he said unto them, look what he demands of them. Whosoever will come after me, let him deny himself, take up his cross, follow me. And whosoever will save his life shall lose it. But whosoever shall lose his life for my sake and the gospel's, the same shall save it. And what shall it profit a man if he gain the whole world and lose his own soul? What shall a man give in exchange for his soul? And so I'm giving you, there are demands on a disciple. There's denial of self. Jesus demands, first of all, the denial of oneself. This is the demand. This is something, if you're going to be a disciple, you can't get out of this. You can't get out of it. He demands that Marvin Smith denies himself. And God calls you to deny yourself. Hebrews 11:24 through 26 tells us about Moses. It says, by faith, Moses, when he was come to years, he refused to be called the son of Pharaoh's daughter, and choosing rather to suffer affliction with the people of God than to enjoy pleasures of sin for a season. And then he says, esteeming the reproach of Christ. In other words, he elevated the very reproach of Christ, greater riches than the treasures in Egypt, for he had a respect unto the recompense of the reward. So listen, Moses said, you know what? I'm going to set aside these short-term pleasures that I know will hinder me, these short-term pleasures of sin and riches of this world. And even Hebrews says that Moses even knew, interesting enough, that he understood this was a reproach of Christ. He even had a sense of Christ in the Old Testament, and he was going to deny himself. So, secondly, Jesus demands death of one's will. In other words, what are you going to do with your life? What are you going to do with your day? Everything needs to be underneath the lordship of Jesus Christ. It's a death to one's will. You say, preacher, I don't know what I'm going to be when I grow up. Well, listen to me carefully. You have no right to choose what you're going to be when you grow up. You got to listen to God. It's God's right to tell you what you're going to be when you grow up. The Bible says in Galatians 2:20, it says, I am crucified with Christ, nevertheless I live. But Christ liveth within me. The life that I now live, I live by the faith of the Son of God who loved me and gave himself for me. Paul said this, I'm not living my life. I'm living for him. It's his life. I remember when I felt I wanted to be a restaurant manager. Alice and I talk about it all the time, goofing off. We'll say, this doesn't work out for us, then we're going to become restaurant managers, okay? So food industry was wonderful. Loved doing it. But Jesus interrupted that and called me to preach. And in that point, I had to say yes to his calling. Number 3, Jesus demands the disciple to be unashamed of the gospel. In other words, if you're going to be a disciple and you're out in this world, you can't be ashamed of the gospel. You say, well, if I was in full-time Christian service, I wouldn't be ashamed. But here on my job, listen, if you can't be unashamed on the job, you won't be unashamed off your job. Jesus demands disciples to be unashamed of the gospel. The Bible says this, whosoever therefore shall be ashamed of me and my words in this adulterous and sinful generation. He says, of whom also the Son of Man shall be ashamed when he cometh in the glory of his Father with his holy angels. We're not to be ashamed of the gospel. Paul said this, for I am not ashamed of the gospel. It's the power of God unto salvation to everyone that believeth, to the Jew first and also to the Greek. Paul said, I'm not ashamed of this thing, okay? When we look at this, being unashamed of the gospel, let me ask you something. Do you struggle passing that tract out? Do you struggle giving that gospel tract to that waitress? Do you struggle when you see someone on the street and the Spirit of God prompts you? Listen, a disciple of Jesus Christ, the distinction of him is he is not ashamed of the gospel of Jesus. Let me give you one last thing about that. my mom I'd sit in church, I'd kind of act up during church. My mom would go, shame, shame, shame on you, Marvin Smith. And you know what she was saying? You disappoint me the way you conduct yourself. You know what Paul was saying? Paul says the gospel has never not conducted itself in power when I gave it out. I never would Paul say, shame, shame, shame on the gospel. Paul says, I'm not ashamed of it because the gospel does what it says it's going to do. It saves, it changes, and the disciple is someone who's willing to give it out because he's unashamed. Next week, we'll do one more of these, okay?